Okay, so because I couldn't get my webcam to focus, I had to draw out our supply curve to begin with, but we've already kind of just covered in class. Price will be on our y-axis, quantity is down here on the x-axis, and our supply curve is upward sloping, which reflects the fact that as we see higher and higher prices, right, as the price increases, people are willing to supply a higher quantity. Right? If I can sell something for a higher price, that's good for me as a producer or a seller. We also talked about that supply really reflects the marginal cost of each one of these quantities. You can think about, let's say I had a price here, right? What that is saying is that for every quantity, right, in this range, that price is greater than my marginal cost. So I will continue to supply additional units as long as that price is greater than or equal to my marginal cost. So the point at which it'd be equal to my marginal cost is, well, wherever I'm at on the supply curve at that price. So what I want to go through now is what a supply shift would look like. We'll start out with a supply increase, and I'll also show you a supply decrease. So the idea of a supply increase, and specifically I'll be thinking about input prices. So if it is now cheaper to purchase materials, right, to produce my good at every given quantity, right? I can think about all these quantities here. Right? At any given quantity, I am now going to be able to produce that quantity for a lower amount, right? Or my costs have decreased. So at every given quantity, I can now see that the price that I'd be willing to sell at is now lower because it now costs me less to produce that number of units. So I draw a line through here, we can kind of think about, we'll call this supply 2, right? Which kind of reflects lower marginal costs, right? My marginal costs have decreased. So if my marginal costs decrease, I'm now willing to supply more to the market at any given price. So that's another way of thinking about this. At any given price, I'm now willing to supply a higher amount to the market. At any given price, I'm now willing to supply a higher quantity to the market. So we call this, right, shift in supply, a supply increase. And usually that can be related to the fact that costs of producing that good have went down. So we could see this through a technology change, right? It makes it, given new technology, it's cheaper to produce the same number of units. Or maybe I'm building houses, the price of lumber has went down. And so now it costs me less to produce each additional house. That's what we would see a supply increase, right? When those marginal costs or those input prices go down. Now, what's more realistic in my example would be the price of lumber is actually skyrocketed. So if we're thinking about the number of houses built or provided to the market, what's a little bit more realistic is that at any given quantity, right, so all these different quantities, I now have a higher cost to produce that number of units. And so at this quantity, right, it now costs me a higher amount. I want to provide this quantity, it's going to cost me more. This quantity is going to cost me more. We can kind of think about, I missed my dots there, but you can kind of get the idea. If we saw a increase in my marginal cost or an increase in my input prices, I would then see a supply decrease. So why should we be thinking about this as a supply decrease? We'll think about it this way. It's another way of kind of thinking about a supply decrease. I just explained that at any given quantity, my costs are now higher, right? But I can also think about at any given price. So at this price here, before I was right there, but now because costs are higher, if that's still the price of the good, I'm willing to supply less to the market, or the quantity supplied is lower. If this is the price, I'm now willing to supply less to the market. So it's a different way of thinking about it. You can kind of see if we start with our original price, well, now after marginal costs have increased, now I'd actually supply nothing to the market at that price. Right? So we've got a supply increase, which looks like a kind of a shift to the right or downward, and a supply decrease, which looks like a shift to the left or upward. So it's a little counterintuitive, but if we think about the principles behind what the supply curves represent, it represents the marginal cost of producing that good. Then this shift to the left represents a supply decrease because at any given price, we're now supplying a smaller quantity to the market.